Welcome to Mother Daughter Projects. I'm Steph.
I'm Vicki.
And today we're going to try to answer the question, is this the best way to cut a circle?
A while back, Woodcraft, which is a woodworking store, sent us this really cool circle jig. Now, we make a lot of projects with circles, but really haven't had a way to really easily make them, so we're very excited to give this jig a try.
But once we got the jig, we realized we needed a couple other things. Now, we already had a palm router, but this actually uses a full-size router, so we needed one of those, which we'd been wanting one, so this was a good excuse to get that, and a couple other accessories to make this work. But if you already have these, then all you need is the jig.
Now, I took the lead on this project, so when we got the router in the mail, I was the one to unbox it. I went through the manual, I went through, looked at some YouTube videos, and did the same thing with the circle jig, so just so I could learn how to use it. So it took me a couple of days to figure it out. Had a couple of bobbles along the way, but we'll share those at the end of the video, and we will answer the question whether I think you could do this yourself.
And we're not just making circles today, we're actually making a project. We've had this project in mind for a little while, but we needed 3 perfect circles for it, and this was the perfect opportunity. So we'll show you how that project came out throughout the video, and we'll show you how we use it at the end. All right, let's get cutting. The Bosch router that we'll be using comes with a fixed base and a plunge router base. We'll be using the plunge router base, but first need to switch out the standard plate with this plate that will accept the Porter cable style bushing that comes with the circle jig. We unscrewed the base and put the new one in place, but didn't fully tighten it down. This is the 1/2-inch bushing that comes with the jig. Mom placed it in the new router base. Then we used a router centering device to make sure the plate was exactly centered with the collet. Then she tightened the router base screws. Next, Mom placed the router bit into the collet. This router can work with 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch diameter router bits. This can be challenging to adjust these 2 wrenches at the same time, so it's helpful to have a buddy to assist. But once the bit is in place, we put the plunge base back on. Next, Mom prepped the first circle by marking the center where we're going to drill a hole for the pivot pin. Then Mom clamped the jig in place with the bushing over the marked center of the circle. Then she plunged the router down to make a 1/4 inch deep hole for the pivot pin. Here's the pivot pin in place. Then she flipped the jig and placed the tailstock over the pivot pin. Mom is adjusting the jig to the size of the circle that she wants. She tested out the size by marking with a pencil to see if it was the right size, and then she put the metal frame over it to check the sizing. Before we cut our first circle, let me explain what we're making. We've been wanting to build a little table to keep our small fire pit supplies in. Mom found this metal frame in the trash, and this will serve as our structure, and inside we're going to use some leftover metal flashing, which we've had for years. We're going to cut 3 circles to make the lid and the base. Alright, let's cut that first circle. First, Mom pushed the plunge lever lock to the left and applied downward pressure until it reached the proper depth. Once the base was locked at that depth, she was able to simply rotate the router and make the first cut. We're using multiple passes, adjusting the depth of the router bit each time. There is a depth gauge on this router, but we're still trying to get used to how it works. So we just used the eyeball method to set the first cut. When the cut was finished, Mom released the plunge lock lever and easily took the router off the jig and removed the jig.
But we did it! Look! A perfect circle!
The first circle will act as the base for the project. Perfect fit. A very proud moment for Mom as she took the lead on using the router and designing this project.
Yes!
For our next circle, we'll follow the same process by first marking a hole for the 1/4 inch pivot pin. Then Mom turned the jig around and placed the pivot pin on the tailstock. She adjusted the jig to size and started to make the cuts. This router does have an attachment for dust collection, but we didn't order it, and it was pretty easy for me to follow along and collect the sawdust. You can see the router easily rotates on the jig, so you can keep the router facing you. We're using a piece of foam insulation on the bottom to protect our work surface. Again, we made multiple passes. The wood we're using is scrap wood, so the look of this side really doesn't matter as it's not going to show in the finished project. Mom cut the last circle in the same manner by first marking the pivot hole, then cutting out the larger circle. You might see that there's a little veer off on the side there, and we'll explain at the end how that happened. And for reference, the large circle is 20 and 1/4 inch in diameter, and the 2 smaller circles are 14 and 3/4 inch diameter. And the entire unit is going to be 17 and 3/4 inch tall. And here's our last circle. Perfect! We're using our pinnacle ruler to check that the inner circle is centered on the top and brad nail that to the top circle. We tested the fit and it worked. Before continuing, we're using our wet dry vac to clean up the router, as it's not recommended to use canned air as that could push sawdust into the motor. Next, we're going to work on the metal surround. This is a little challenging to work with, but it's scrap that we've had sitting around for years, so we thought it'd be perfect to use it in this project. We measured the metal to the diameter of the circle and cut it to size using our tin snips. Then we used our Pinnacle precision square to mark where to cut a band to go around the top edge of the metal, which will provide some structural support. We cut this out with tin snips, then folded it in half. Then we try to round it out around the wood circle. We used our spring-loaded punch to mark where we're going to nail the metal to the wood base. We're using small tack nails to attach the two pieces together. To make the top a little more rigid, we added the top banding. We fit that in place, making sure to wear gloves so we don't get cut by the metal. This gave the metal much more support at the top. To secure this and the side in place, Mom is drilling a hole and using a rivet gun and rivet to secure it into place. This is a great option for securing metal and looks great on the outside, but it does look a little unfinished on the inside. In our case, that doesn't really matter since we're just going to hold firewood inside. Mom continued with this process. And to remove that permanent marker, Mom just used a little bit of acetone. And lastly, Mom screwed some plastic feet onto the metal frame. And I decided it might be nice to put a metal edge around the wood top, so I used our Ryobi battery-powered cutter to cut the metal this time. I will say the tool was faster, but using the tin snips left less of a sharp edge. I did use a metal file to try to smooth out the rough edges. I used our punch and then nailed it into place like we did with the base. Off camera, Mom painted the wood with an outdoor Olympic solid stain to help protect it from the elements. And here it is, all done. The 3 circles were perfect for this project. This is a great place for storage and surface for our tiny solo stove. What we learned. Now the first thing we learned is the table works exactly how we wanted. We wanted to be able to put all of our fire pit supplies for our small solo stove, and it works perfect. We have it sitting here and we have a nice fire going, and we actually have it sitting on a piece of slate just for extra protection since this is wood, and if it gets hot then it will be nice and protected.
Now to answer that question, can anyone use this jig? I'm going to say yes, but with qualifications. Now, if you are very comfortable with using a router, you can take this out of the box and you are good to go. Now, it took me a little more time because I actually had to start from scratch because I had never used a router like this before. So it took me a while to get comfortable with it. So depending on your strength and your skill level, you may want to have a buddy with you to help use it, which I was more comfortable having Steph over there to help me actually use it.
On the first couple cuts, the jig got off a little bit, and we realized it's because there are these little knobs that secure the rod to the parts of the jig, and those can move back and forth a little bit, and they were a little too close to the edge, so they need to be moved more towards the center. So just keep an eye on those to make sure they're nice and secure.
And one thing that makes this jig really versatile is you can cut even larger circles but just using ordinary wood dowels. So we tried it out. We haven't actually made it with the wood dowels, but you can make it, as long as your wood dowels are, which is a pretty neat thing to do.
Woodcraft did suggest that we wax the bottom of the router base to make it glide more easily on the circle jig. Well, we didn't really have any issues with it not gliding, but we'll probably use that in the future just to make sure it's nice and smooth.
We want to thank Woodcraft for sending us the circle jig to try out, and right before they sent us that, they sent us 3 precision measuring tools. Those are by Pinnacle, and they're just really, really nice tools. They're well made, and I can see handing those down to the next generation of woodworkers.
So thanks for joining us, and if you want to see more projects from us, be sure to visit us at mother.projects.com and subscribe right here on YouTube, click the bell, and be alerted to all our new projects. Should we make s'mores?
Ooh,
S'mores!
Yes.
I'll get the
You should have said that earlier.
Oh, yeah.